Number 5. Dread X Collection. The last thing you'd want in your horror anthology is some—
Sorry about that, everyone. I'm not gonna let my cousin do intros anymore. Let's try that one from the top. Indie horror games are everywhere. With countless new games releasing every week, it can be pretty hard to find the hidden gems in all that static. Of course you have journalists, streamers, and people like me trying to share these games to the public, but there's also a growing wave of indie publishers curating these small games for a much wider audience. One notable example is the Dread XP team, responsible for publishing games like My Friendly Neighborhood, Spookware, Sucker for Love, and the Dread X collections. These titles are structured as short horror anthologies with a central game to tie them all together. You might have heard of any of the countless games from the past Dread X collections, like Squirrel Stapler, a game about stapling squirrels to summon God, made by the creator of Iron Lung and Dusk. If you couldn't guess by the title, we're going to be looking at the latest entry in the series, the Dread X Collection 5, featuring a hub world and 12 short games made by a wide variety of indie horror developers. There's a lot of games to cover here, and I don't like making super long videos, so I'll try to keep each one pretty short. There will be spoilers, so feel free to skip around the video or come back later if you want. Starting it off, we have the hub world game, Outpost 3000. You're locked into an alien-themed restaurant for a birthday party, kind of like a spacey Chuck E. Cheese. You usually visit a room, collect a page for a comic, solve a little puzzle, and then get a gift. You take these gifts back to the table and get to choose which game you want to unlock. Nothing too revolutionary, but it gets the job done. The hub world holds the anthology together, and it gives you a nice little break in between some of the more hectic games in the collection. There's a couple parts where a monster shows up that you have to avoid, but the rest of the rooms are filled with a good variety of easy puzzles. It makes sense that they kept all the puzzles pretty short and light, because this world just exists to move you along through the rest of the games. So like I said before, it serves its purpose, but that's pretty much it. Karao or Karao is a game about karaoke, subterranean dangers, and folk tales, and a whole lot of other things that get only a very vague explanation. Regardless of the strange storytelling, this game probably has the most polished gameplay from the entire collection. The survival horror elements are limited, but they're all pretty well implemented, making for a memorable experience. You spend most of your time blasting your way through various underground settings, with a couple outdoor sections to round it out. There's a handful of number code puzzles, all integrated pretty nicely into the game, including some where you shoot enemies, their bodies start floating, and they paint the walls with the numbers that you need. But the recurring theme in this game is the karaoke. In this case, a handful of machines scattered around the world that start off a little cinematic sequence. They play a creepy, but somehow pretty catchy song while lights dance around revealing enemies or clues for the next puzzle. Each karaoke segment is pretty unique and definitely adds a lot to the overall experience. I can't just play the song and expect you to get it, but trust me, by the time you're done with this game it'll be repeating itself over and over in your head. Oh, and it's got this pretty cool sequence where you slide down this tunnel, shooting enemies and collecting items along the way. Very nice. Karao gets both the Best Gameplay and Best Creepy Song awards. Rotten Stigma is a very classically styled horror game. You read notes, solve puzzles, collect supplies, and fight some deformed monsters along the way. It's obviously inspired by the older Resident Evil and Silent Hill entries, and it does manage to mimic their style pretty well. The puzzles were a bit tougher than most of the other games, but not to the point of being frustrating. Combat had a little variety, featuring both a gun and a melee weapon to use. The main thing I felt like it was missing was sound design. Lots of dead air and minimal sound effects made it feel a bit flat. A deeper soundscape definitely could have amped up the horror. That, and it ends pretty abruptly out of nowhere. Rotten Stigma gets the Best Low-Budget Silent Hill award. Spirit Guardian is kind of like Amnesia, for kids. It's got a million physics props, cabinets and drawers to search, lockers to hide in, and a roaming instant death enemy. You have to solve some puzzles in a daycare while avoiding the patrolling ghost. You know, standard horror stuff. The spooky granny flashes on your screen when she catches you, and then you have to restart back at the entrance. This was one of the few games I ended up giving up on. After making it through a few rooms and getting caught a couple times, I just didn't have any desire to continue playing. Spirit Guardian gets the Best Game That Makes You Want to Replay Amnesia award. We Never Left is perhaps the most cinematic of the bunch, featuring some higher quality graphics which are then crunched down with a retro filter. You play as a shut-in game developer trying to make the next big thing. They say write the stories you know, so I guess it hits home here. Right from the start, I was shocked at the incredibly good voiceover in this game. Way better than most indie horror titles. I thought the guy sounded like the main character from Dying Light 2 and Beastars, and I was right.
Well, I guess I just feel kind of stuck.
I didn't recognize the girl's voice, but she was very obviously a professional too. I guess we know where most of the budget went.
Yes, but I always like to ask. It's just nice to hear you share it in your own words in person.
Anyways, I think there's supposed to be a text adventure portion to this game, but I never got to play it. The computer says insert data disk, and despite searching the house multiple times over, I never could find it. Maybe it needed a little more to lead the player along, or maybe I just missed something obvious. Oh well, props for setting the quality bar at least. We Never Left gets the Best Voiceover in a Game I Barely Played award. Hunsvotti is a very Nordic game about Finnish traditions and dark humor. You play as the local pariah, hated by most of the townsfolk for unknown reasons. People knock you down, taunt you, hit you, and some kids even try to give you an unwanted shower. There's a weird old lady and some robed guys that try to catch you too. And if you get caught, then a pig sprays milk on you. Man, I don't really know what's happening here, I'm just trying to explain what I experienced. Anyways, you collect 7 flowers and a demon comes out of the town well. You get superpowers and use them to squish all the townspeople as revenge. The effects as you twist and force squeeze everyone are pretty neat the first couple times, but then you have to do it to every last person, so it quickly becomes tiring. You know how basically every game makes kids invincible to pass international regulations? Yeah, well, about that. Hunsvotti gets the Best Nordic Game award, only because there were no Swedish entries. Sorry. Gallerie is a very overloaded trip through a spooky art museum. If anything, this would have to be the Museum of Maximalism. This game throws so much at you. Crazy visuals, eye-bleeding colors, loud noises, and a whole lot more. Even the insane run speed feeds into the constant maximalist design principles. The last time I felt a game was this overloaded was Agony, and we all know how that turned out. I will say that it's a little more acceptable in a bite-sized game like this, but by the end I was still feeling a bit fatigued by the flood of strange, bright, and almost random visuals. Oh, and the voiceover is done in an ASMR-like speaking voice. I know there's a lot of people that like ASMR, but I can't stand the sound of it. Anyways, you have to solve little DDR-like puzzles while super fast monsters are trying to get you. I thought these were fine, but I never felt like I had enough time, leading to pretty much all my deaths in this game. Then there's these other parts where you have to speak to a computer while referencing a translation sheet. Neat idea, but it became annoying enough that I ended up just resorting to a trial and error method in the end. Also, there's this part at the end of the game where you have to do a handful of the hardest DDR parts in between dodging monsters for 5 minutes straight without a single checkpoint. Trust me, it was painful. I'm actually surprised I stuck it out and beat this one. Gallerie gets the Best Turn All Sliders to Max award. The Book of Blood is a mashup of most of the popular indie horror tropes all in one. A spooky carnival, restarting power boxes, windows to look out for the bad guy, and a heaping ton of scripted jump scares. Basically everything that the Five Nights at Freddy's kids are expecting nowadays. Despite it all being competently put together, I just felt like I'd played this game 1,000 times before. There is a neat little book that provides lore and puzzles to solve, but other than that, it was exactly as I expected. My main gripe with this one is that the enemy doesn't physically exist in the world. Every now and then he just pops out of thin air to jump scare you, just for the heck of it. You can't really avoid him in any way. You can crouch to be quieter, which I guess makes him take longer to show up, but then you'd have to suffer through the entire game moving at a snail's pace. It was much easier to just sprint everywhere and mash through the QuickTime events every 30 seconds or so. I did manage to finish it, giving a little cutscene where it reveals that you were helping the bad guys all along. So wait, was the stabby knife guy from before supposed to be good or bad? I guess it doesn't matter, because either way the game ends with you being stabbed by one guy or another guy. The Book of Blood gets the Best Game for Streamers Who Scream at Everything award. Vestige is actually 2 games wrapped up in one. There's the rather bland game walking around a house and getting jump scared, and the excellent minigame where you play as a radical skeleton pulling off tricks on a motorbike. I actually think it's a little unfortunate that they devoted time to this outer storyline when the Tony Hawk skeleton game was one of the most enjoyable parts of the collection. But even that minigame gets interrupted by jump scares in the real world, and if you don't look away from the jump scare monster, you die. So you're constantly forced to pause the skeleton game for jump scares, and then you take even more time away to progress the main story in between levels. If I had a killer monster popping up every 10 seconds while I was playing PlayStation, I would simply turn it off. They could have taken the time they spent on the main story and fleshed out the goofy motorbike game, but I'll respect their decision to try and tell a more serious story. Vestige gets the best minigame that should have been the whole game award. Resver is easily the most memorable game from the entire collection. If you're aware of Color Fiction's past games, this is pretty par for the course. They make some very high quality games that aren't as much played as they are experienced. Very minimal gameplay, but an absolute feast in the audio-visual department. The basic concept is that you're invited to a secret rave underneath a back alley convenience store. The party's raging until a hole opens up in the floor, dropping hundreds of clubbers into the abyss. The following segment is so brutally well done that snippets of video just can't do it justice. It just keeps going and going, much longer than you'd expect, really burning that excruciating scene into your mind. The rest of the game consists of traversing through twisting underground tunnels, trying to work your way back to the surface. Some of these hallways drag on for a bit, but the visuals stay consistently good throughout. It pays off with some nice scenes at the tail end, but nothing beats the human flood from before. Unfortunately, this is another game that's hard to explain with words alone. You absolutely need to play this and experience everything firsthand to fully understand it. Resver wins out with the Best Game in the Collection award. Seriously, if you're only going to play one game, this is the one to pick. Ludomalica is about playing a haunted board game, sort of like an evil Jumanji or something. Not a bad concept, but the execution is kind of bland. You close some doors, flip some light switches, roll the dice, and avoid a shadow man. It works, but I can't really say much more than that. More than anything else in the collection, this one felt like an amateur project. Not to say that's bad, I mean everybody has to start somewhere. I played for a while, but it never really seemed to be going anywhere, so I eventually gave up. Ludomalica gets the Best Competitive Light Switch Game award. Beyond the Curtain is a game about falling asleep at a puppet show. Oh, and the puppets are evil, because of course they are. You spend a large amount of your time running through rather nondescript backstage environments. If you've ever been backstage at a theater once, imagine that, but stretch it out for miles. And despite the game telling you not to run unless it's necessary, you pretty much have to, unless you want this one to take hours. There are occasionally enemies to avoid, but a large amount of time in this game is spent slowly running through very long, empty areas with nothing really happening. And the checkpoints are pretty far apart, making you repeat a good deal of that walking if you do die. I made it to some gooey tunnels with an evil worm, but by that point I was running out of patience. I can take some of the blame for that, but the rest of it came down to repeating multi-minute walking segments only to die and have to do it all over again. I can't say if it all pays off in the end, because I had already put in enough time, so I dipped out of this one. Beyond the Curtain gets the Best Non-Yellow Version of the Backrooms award. Interim is a very opaque game about Hollywood, I guess? I think you play as somebody trying to become a star, but the story is very vague. It feels like it takes pieces from lots of meta-commentary movies like Videodrome, Mulholland Drive, and the like. There are eyeballs and TV-themed props everywhere. The developer shows up to deliver some Twilight Zone-esque speeches here and there, and eventually you defeat a giant eyeball and return to the real world. I don't really know what happened, but it's clearly got something to say about the film industry, if you care to dig into it. The gameplay itself was mostly just walking around, with a very janky physics climbing section for the final boss. You have to pick up boards and use them to build stairs upwards, but they pretty much never land how you want them to, making the experience more frustrating than exciting. The live segments are delivered pretty well, but the rest of it feels very disjointed. Interim gets the Best Recreation of Trying to Understand Videodrome a Second Time award. So that's the Dread X Collection 5, 12+1 spooky games by up-and-coming indie horror developers. Pretty good deal for the price. Plus, you're not only supporting the developers, but a publisher that's bringing more indie horror to the masses. If you couldn't gather from my opinions, I'd definitely recommend Resver and Karao as the must-play entries in this collection. The others ran the gambit from interesting but flawed to tropey and forgettable, as you'd expect from any anthology, of course. With so many games here, I'm sure there's a huge range of opinions on all of them. So if you either played or watched through the titles, I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. Scariest game? Most memorable? Next soon-to-be famous developer? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribing always helps out a lot. Despite me saying I wanted to keep this one short, there were just way too many games to talk about, so it stretched on a little bit. Anyways, I think that's a good point to wrap this one up. Thanks for sticking around till the end, folks, and I hope to see you all in the next one.